Wrecked by scandal and unable to form a consensus on the key issues, last week's G20 meeting in Cannes, France has been widely dismissed as a failure by the international financiers seeking to secure their global financial architecture. But with the future of the Eurozone itself hanging in the balance, how much further will the bankers and bureaucrats allow the global economy to sink before they enact their world banking solution? This is the GRTV Backgrounder for grtv.ca. Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report with your GRTV Backgrounder for Global Research TV. Last week's G20 Summit in Cannes, France is already being written off as a bust by the international financiers who were hoping to bolster the fledgling European Financial Stability Fund with international support, and to implement a new global financial services tax which they claim will be the long-term solution to the ongoing global economic meltdown. The leaders of the G20 meeting were left with little more to show for their efforts than photo opportunities, as even their normally upbeat final declaration reflected the sour mood of the public over the economic catastrophe that the G20 leaders themselves helped to bring about. Since our last meeting, global recovery has weakened, particularly in advanced countries, leaving unemployment at unacceptable levels, they wrote in their declaration. Signs of vulnerabilities are appearing in emerging markets. Increased commodity prices have harmed growth and hit the most vulnerable. Noting that global imbalances persist, all they could offer was a reaffirmation of their commitment to work together on the problems ahead. The signal failure of the summit was a distinct lack of resolution on the Greek crisis, as an emergency joint meeting of the EU, IMF, and the G20 failed to find any non-EU interest in funding the European Union's bailout of nations like Greece, hammered by the sovereign debt crisis.
I don't have any intention to make a direct contribution to the European Financial Stability Fund. Why not? Because no one else has, so why should I?
The meeting was not without its share of scandal either. In one incident that has gained considerable attention in light of growing evidence that Israel is preparing a strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, the presidents of the US and France were caught in an unguarded moment speaking about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Behind the scenes at the G20 Summit in France last week, President Obama and President Sarkozy are having a chat. The topic, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Sarkozy says, "I can't stand him anymore. He's a liar." Mr. Obama replies, "You're sick of him. I have to deal with him every day." The conversation was picked up by microphones, which presumably neither president thought were switched on. That sort of thing has happened before in the UK, and it's been headline news. But here's the curious thing. Those comments were made last Thursday, but the French reporters who heard it apparently agreed not to publish what they heard.
In an even more startling development, best-selling author and Bilderberg researcher Daniel Estulin appeared on the Corbett Report last week to reveal the story behind former Greek Prime Minister Papandreou's abrupt reversal of his own dramatic pledge to give the people of Greece a democratic referendum on the terms of the Eurozone bailout deal. The plan was dropped within 4 days of that announcement, just one day after his meeting with French President Sarkozy ahead of the G20 summit. According to Estulin sources, Papandreou's abrupt turnabout was the result of a direct threat from Sarkozy and the European powers.
Europeans like Sarkozy welcomed Greece's decision not to hold a referendum.
The conditions are being created for a favourable consensus in Greece on the October 27 Accord. And we are very glad that the atmosphere in Greece today, at the end of this week, is nothing like it was at the beginning of last week.
Well, there's very little going on in terms of agreement. It just goes to show you that the United States of Europe is they're not so united. You know, you have a lot more private and individual interests when pull comes to shove. What I can tell you, and this comes from our inside sources within the conference itself, and as you know, a few years back, our people were able to get into the meeting in St. Andrews and steal key documents, which were posted with you. I believe that was in 2009 when I was in Thailand, if I'm not mistaken. So again, we have people working on this side who have access to all this information. And said one of the reasons that Papandreou gave, a 180-degree turn is that he was literally in his private meeting with Sarkozy. He was threatened with, Sarkozy told him literally, unless you pull the referendum, we're going to kill you. These were literally his words. And I'm saying this for the first time because I simply haven't done any interviews. So you could say this is a world exclusive. They threatened his life, and Papandreou knows these are the big leagues. As I say in my Bilderberg book, true story, the Bilderberg Group, Aldemoro was killed after Kissinger threatened him. And Papandreou understands that unless he pulled the reform, and he would also be killed. And this is actually the only reason why he went back on his word.
Well, I can't let that bombshell that you just dropped just go. If there's any other details you can tell us about the threat against Papandreou, I'd love to hear anything you have.
Well, basically very little was said. They simply didn't have a lot of time. They discussed a lot of the alternatives, but there's simply no alternative. I mean, Greece is dead. There's nothing you can do about this nation. The best thing that Greece can do, and this is something that one of the reasons that the Sarkozys and the Merkels are so terrified of the consequences of, is Papandreou actually thinking of leaving the Union, and Zapatero was thinking of leaving the Union. And of course, if that happens, the entire edifice of European Union collapses, into nothing. So they simply can't afford for Greece to leave, not because they want Greece, because it just leads to greater destruction on the part of the elite who understand that you've got to create this one world company limited. You destroy nation states, you take away their currencies, you destroy their constitutions, you destroy their culture, you destroy everything, and you create this pan world. We have corporations ruling the world on the name of the of governments, and then there's the people. So the point of Papandreou's meeting with Sarkozy is that to make sure he understood that he cannot leave the Union, and he has to accept the reforms. He has to withdraw this ridiculous proposal for actually consultation with the people. Imagine this in a democracy: people having a say at something.
The news of Papandreou's reneging on his promise to hold the Greek referendum was met with relief by European leaders and the mainstream economic press, who were well aware that the Greek people were likely to overwhelmingly reject the terms of a Eurozone deal, saddled as it is with punishing austerity measures that will cripple the Greek economy for the foreseeable future. But perhaps the biggest defeat at the summit from the perspective of the international banking oligarchy was the inability of the G20 leaders to agree on an international framework for the so-called Robin Hood tax, a proposed financial services tax that would supposedly take money from the financial services sector to provide funds for international issues, but which is propounded by a surprising number of billionaires and elite banking insiders. The financial transaction tax is an idea that has been around since the 1970s, when economist James Tobin argued for a version of it in a Princeton lecture. It would levy a minute tax on all financial transactions, and has been proposed as a way of discouraging speculation, regulating derivatives trading, and even funding international initiatives on subjects that are politically untenable at the national level, like climate change, or even creating a permanent funding mechanism for the United Nations. Although supposedly meant to penalize the financial services industry, the idea is in fact being propounded by many international financiers. In his 2005 book, George Soros on Globalization, the billionaire financial tycoon advocated for just such a tax, writing, "The globalization of financial markets has given capital an unfair advantage over other sources of taxation. A tax on financial transactions would redress the balance." He went on to add, "Collection has to be worldwide, including tax havens." In 2009, the globalist think tank the Aspen Institute released a statement supporting just such a tax and arguing that it should even be extended to tax-exempt entities. Signatories to that document included billionaire investor Warren Buffett, the CEOs of IBM, Veridian, and Duke Energy, the former president of the World Bank, the former chairman of Goldman Sachs, the president of the AFL-CIO, and dozens of other international power players. They failed to get their wish at this year's G20 Summit, however, as no deal was reached regarding how such a tax would be implemented or what it would be used for.
Now the tax on financial transaction is an element of discussion, and I hope it will be completely set up in the year 2012.
Ultimately, this year's G20 Summit did not achieve what many of the financiers and bureaucrats behind the current international regulatory framework were looking for. But given that the very viability of the leading example of regional government, the EU itself, hangs in the balance, expect all of these issues to be pursued even that much more rigorously in similar meetings, summits, and conferences in the coming months. For more on this story and other breaking news and current events, please go to globalresearch.ca. For more research and analysis by James Corbett, please go to corbettreport.com.